The lights in the lecture hall cut out for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, my heart tried to climb out of my chest. When they came back on, Professor Halden was standing at the front of the room with a look on his face that I had never seen before. Not confusion, not anger. Something closer to fear, quickly hidden behind his usual calm voice. "Sit down," he said, though nobody had stood up. "We are continuing the lesson. I am Mira Ashworth, a student at the Kalen Interstellar Academy, and until that morning, my biggest worry was whether I would finish my essay on ancient human warfare before the deadline. That changed the moment the professor pulled up the file on the ancient warlord. His name was Elias Reyes. Even hearing it filled the room with a strange kind of silence, the kind you feel in your bones rather than hear with your ears. Every student in that hall had grown up hearing stories about him, the way children on other worlds grow up hearing about storms or floods, something powerful and far away that could never actually touch them. Reyes had lived over 200 years ago, during a war that nearly erased entire colonies from the star maps. The stories said he commanded a fleet that should not have won a single battle, yet won every one it fought. The record said he made choices so extreme that entire enemy commanders surrendered the moment they learned he was leading the opposing side. Nobody in the room believed that was an exaggeration. Not after seeing the numbers. Professor Halden brought up the images. Burned ships, empty colonies. A man standing on a bridge that was catching fire around him, giving orders as calmly as if he were reading a weather report. "Many of you will call him a hero," Professor Halden said. "Many of you will call him something far worse. Today, I want you to understand why both of those answers miss the point." I sat near the back, next to a quiet girl named Priya Sundaram, who had transferred into our class only a few weeks earlier. She never spoke unless the professor called on her directly, and even then, her answers were short and careful, like she was choosing every word from a very small, very guarded box. That day, something about her had changed. Her hands were folded tightly on the desk, and her eyes were locked on the burning ship in the image, unmoving, as if she had seen it before somewhere far more personal than a history lesson. The professor asked a simple question. Was Elias Reyes someone worth admiring, or someone worth condemning? Half the room jumped straight into arguing that he was a monster. They pointed to the destruction, the fear he caused, the reports of enemy fleets fleeing before a single shot was fired. The other half argued just as loudly that he was a genius, a man who ended a war that would have wiped out entire star systems if it had continued even a few more months. The debate grew louder, faster, more heated, until the professor raised a hand and the room fell quiet again. "Miss Sundaram," he said, turning toward her, "you have not said a word. What do you think?" Priya did not answer right away. She looked at the burning ship on the screen, then at the professor, then, slowly, at the rest of us. "I think," she said, her voice steady but quiet, "that all of you are asking the wrong question." A few students laughed, not unkindly, just surprised that she was finally speaking. She did not laugh with them. "You keep asking what he was. A hero, a villain, a genius, a monster. You want one word that fits him perfectly so you can stop thinking about him and move on to the next lesson. That is not history. That is just sorting." The laughter stopped. "He was a person," she continued. "A person who watched his home colony get destroyed in a single afternoon, without warning, without any chance to fight back. He lost almost everyone he knew in that one attack, and afterward, he made a decision that most of you have never had to imagine making. He decided that the only way to stop it from happening again, to anyone, anywhere, was to make sure no enemy would ever again believe that attacking without warning was worth the cost." Nobody moved. Even Professor Halden had gone still. "It worked," she said. "For over 2 centuries, nobody has attempted anything close to what happened to his home colony. Not once. You can debate whether the price was worth it. That is a fair question. But you cannot pretend he was simply cruel for no reason, because every single choice he made came from somewhere, from someone. From a boy who lost everything and decided that grief alone was not going to be the end of his story." Her voice cracked slightly on the last few words, and that was the moment everyone in the room understood that something was different about how she was speaking. This was not a student reciting facts from a textbook. This was something else. Professor Halden studied her carefully. "That is a very personal way of describing a man from 200 years ago, Miss Sundaram." Priya took a slow breath, the kind of breath a person takes right before they say something they have been carrying for a long time. "He was my grandfather," she said, "many generations back, but direct family. I have his old uniform in a box at home. I have letters he wrote to my great-grandmother. Letters that were never in any history archive because my family chose to keep them private. I grew up hearing his story from people who actually knew him, not from a data file with numbers attached to it. The room went completely silent. Somewhere near the front, a chair creaked as someone shifted, and it sounded impossibly loud. I am not here to defend everything he did, she continued. Some of his choices still keep me awake some nights, if I am being honest. But I am the only person in this room who ever had to explain, to a much younger cousin, why other children sometimes went quiet when they heard our family name. So please forgive me if I do not enjoy watching all of you turn him into a simple answer for a test question. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Professor Halden did something none of us expected. He walked to his desk, picked up the small remote that controlled the screen, and turned off the image of the burning ship completely. "Class," he said, "I think we just received the real lesson for today, and it did not come from me." After class ended, most students hurried out, whispering to each other, already turning the moment into a story they would tell their friends. I stayed behind, and so did Priya, gathering her things slowly, as if she were still deciding whether she regretted speaking at all. "That took a lot of courage," I said, because it felt true, and because I did not know what else to say. She looked up at me, surprised that I had stayed. "I almost did not do it," she admitted. "For years, my family taught me to stay quiet about who we were related to. People hear the name Reyes attached to that war, and they build an entire opinion of you before you have said a single word. But you said it anyway. Because everyone in that room was talking about him like he was a story, not a person. And I got tired of hearing my family's history treated like it belongs to a textbook and not to actual people who lived it." We walked out of the hall together, into the wide courtyard where the evening lights were just beginning to switch on above us. Students from other classes moved around us, laughing about ordinary things, completely unaware of what had just happened inside that lecture hall. "Do you think people will treat you differently now?" I asked. Priya thought about it for a moment. "Maybe for a while," she said, "but I would rather they know the truth and struggle with it than keep imagining a version of him that was never real. He was not a legend built to scare people. He was a boy who lost everything, and then spent the rest of his life trying to make sure nobody else had to feel that same loss." I thought about that the entire walk back to my room that night. About how easy it is to turn a person into a symbol once enough time has passed. How simple it becomes to reduce an entire life into a single word on a test. Hero, villain, genius, monster. But Priya had reminded an entire room of students, all in the span of a few sentences, that history is never just about the events themselves. It is about the people who lived through them, who made choices in moments none of us could ever fully understand unless we had stood exactly where they stood. Elias Reyes was gone long before any of us were born, yet his story still had the power to silence a room full of strangers 200 years later. Not because of the battles he fought, but because of the granddaughter who was brave enough to remind us that even the most powerful stories in history once belonged to ordinary families, sitting quietly in the back of a classroom, carrying memories the rest of us could never fully imagine. That night, I understood something I had never fully grasped before. History is not just something we study from a distance. Sometimes, it is sitting right next to us, taking careful notes, waiting for the right moment to remind us that every name and every record was once a real person, loved by someone, remembered by someone, and never as simple as the label history chooses to give them.